with the archives. The National Archives is a federal agency. It has its own inspector general, its own internal inspector and investigator when they think there is a mishandling of federal records. And yes, White House records are to be with the National Archives. That's the investigation that we know the Trump team has been cooperating with because the archives said so. Former President Trump, in that statement tonight, says there has been cooperation, which is why he's questioning and calling it inappropriate that a search warrant would be executed at his home.
All right. I want to bring in now Zeke Miller. He is a White House correspondent he is the White House correspondent for the Associated Press. He's also a contributor to CBS News. Zeke, we just heard Scott say that the archives say that the former president has been cooperating, but we also know that many records that are usually kept by White House staff have been missing. What more can you tell us?
You know, it's not just that these records were kept by Trump after he left the White House. It's that some of those records, according to the archives and others, and some of the independent referrals that have been taking place afterwards, appear to have been classified. And that's the other wrinkle here as well. That there's the Presidential Records Act, which governs and very strictly how presidential documents have to be maintained. They're the custody of the American people, of the federal government, for posterity. But then there's also potentially the separate issue of classification. And there's a whole separate regime that exists for how to maintain classified documents. And we all learned a whole lot about that back in 2016 when then candidate Donald Trump made a lot of hay over former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's use of a private email system and of government records, and then also potentially some classified communications that took place on that system. So there's, if this is ultimately what is behind the execution of the search warrant, there's sort of certain irony to all of that. And one of the things that that those records have to be maintained in a very specific way, depending on the classification level, including specific types of safes rated by federal agencies to ensure that they comply with government standards. Any of those things could be relevant to potentially building a case regarding the handling of those documents if that reporting is clear. It might not even be just finding these specific documents that may be missing. It's also investigating the even the setting with which documents that had previously been turned over to the archives were kept, for the purpose of establishing how those documents were treated after the president left office.
Thank you, Zeke. We'll come back to you with some more questions. I also want to report that Nicole Killian says that the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol says it will not be commenting on this search warrant. I want to bring in now Jessica Levinson. She is a CBS News legal contributor. Jessica, we heard from Jeff Pegues that this really is unprecedented. We also heard from the former president saying nothing like this has ever happened to a president of the United States before. Give us some more information about why the FBI would be going into the former president's home at a time when, according to our sources, he wasn't there.
Simply put, because they're looking for evidence, not necessarily a person, but they're looking for potentially, as you've been reporting, documents. So what do we need for a warrant like this, the reporting I'm seeing for potentially a no-knock warrant? What they need is probable cause that there was a federal crime that was committed and probable cause that the evidence of that crime is where they say it was, in this case at Mar-a-Lago. So we don't need the president or the former president for this particular search warrant. What we need are the documents. And that makes perfect sense given the reporting that you've done so far, which is that this could be about the Federal Records Act, that this could be about the documents, not just run-of-the-mill documents, which obviously need to be stored in the National Archives, but potentially even classified documents. I think there are a couple of reasons why that reporting makes a lot of sense, and that this isn't, for instance, necessarily about the fake elector scheme or something else directly connected to January 6th. Now, obviously, this is breaking. I think it's been less than an hour that we've heard about this, but it is a very big deal. We had a federal magistrate judge that had to sign off on this search warrant. Again, probable cause that a federal crime was committed, you have to point to a specific part of the federal code, and probable cause that the evidence of the crime is where they're executing the search warrant. It's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but it is big.
I want to bring back in Jeff Pegues now. We have him back on the phone. Jeff, we heard Jessica say that they need to have probable cause that the information that they're looking for is in fact there. What more are you learning about what the FBI may have gleaned or actually left with when they vacated Mar-a-Lago?
Well, CBS News has confirmed that the search warrant served on Mar-a-Lago in West Palm Beach is related to the missing documents investigation. As we've outlined over the last several minutes, there are several investigations that the former president is connected to. But that is the one that started in February or so of this year. So earlier this year, it's been ongoing for several months now. And what we have at the former president's property is FBI agents serving this warrant, looking for more information, more potential evidence. You know, as you know, and you probably, many of you who are watching this program, perhaps listening to this program, have seen some of the most recent reporting today that the former president, there are images of documents in toilets. And so the former president had a reputation for tearing up and flushing White House documents down toilets. You know, and so this missing document case involves, you know, potentially top secret classified information. And so that's in part what this investigation is about. And we're also told by our sources, even though the former president characterizes this as a raid, we have multiple sources telling us that that is, you know, this image of FBI agents coming into the club with guns drawn is not accurate. This is an operation that has been described to us as run-of-the-mill. In other words, the FBI agents involved were professional in how they handled this. Now, that said, this is obviously an unusual situation. I don't know if we've ever seen a former president's home where there has been a search warrant served on a former president's home. As I said earlier, perhaps we'll have to get a historian to look at this, because I don't even think it happened to former President Nixon, then President Nixon, but I could be wrong. But regardless, this is an unusual situation. And, you know, frankly, I can understand why the former president would be upset. However, these are investigators doing their job. You have this ongoing investigation. And so just to reiterate, CBS News has now confirmed that the search warrant carried out at the former president's residence in Florida, Mar-a-Lago, is not related to the January 6th investigations, but our sources, well-placed sources who would know this kind of information, we are being told now, multiple sources, that this is related to the missing documents case, Lana. And by the way, before I go, we've reached out to the Department of Justice, we've reached out to the FBI, and they are not commenting on what has happened.
Very important reporting, Jeff, that this is in fact related to missing documents, not related necessarily to any of the other investigations that others' minds may be going to. But the Presidential Records Act of 1978 changed the classification of presidential records from private to public, that these are in fact something that belongs to the American people, that must be archived in an appropriate way. And as we have seen from multiple reporting, that the Trump administration did not it appears, follow those requirements. I want to bring back in CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killion. Nicole, what more are you learning?
Well, we are hearing from some people close to the former president, some of his advisors and aides who are describing this FBI activity as ridiculous and political, also confirming that this is related to the Presidential Records Act. But these are people who are in touch regularly with the former president. One source who has been on calls for the last half hour or so regarding this and telling our political director, Finn Gomez, when have you heard about a raid because of the Presidential Records Act? Now, as Jeff pointed out, this was not a raid in the sense of guns drawn, but more a run-of-the-mill search warrant as it is being described to us, but still clearly some, response and reaction from the former president's team, as we also saw his statement, which confirmed that this federal activity was taking place. And of course, this comes on the heels of the former president, really trying to get back in the game politically. He was just in Dallas over the weekend at a conservative conference, CPAC, where he won overwhelmingly a presidential straw poll there for 2024 by 69% of the participants who attended that conference. This is often kind of gives you an early temperature gauge of support for candidates and kind of where they may stand. And again, at this point in time, the former president receiving a lot of overwhelming support there and continuing to tease a possible presidential run. So how this could potentially impact those plans remains to be determined, again, as we learn more about the nature of this investigation, but clearly, certainly probably not the press that the former president is seeking as he looks to not only perhaps reconsider a future presidential run, but also, we are just a couple of months away from the midterms where the former president has been actively campaigning for candidates across the board. In fact, we've got another primary coming up in Wisconsin tomorrow where the former president is backing a candidate for governor there against another candidate for governor that his former vice president, Mike Pence, is backing. So, we have kind of seen this proxy war, if you will, between the former president and former vice president when it comes to different candidates. Saw this last week with respect to the Arizona primary and the gubernatorial race there. So again, with this activity at his residence in Mar-a-Lago, does that kind of damage some of that political capital going forward, whether it's in his stumping for candidates or, again, in assessing his own political future? And again, that will remain to be seen.
Very important point about the timing, Nicole. I'm wondering if we can bring back in Zeke Miller, who has experience at the White House and had followed the last presidential contest and the one before that. On that question of timing that Nicole is talking to, because our CBS News political director, Finn Gomez, sources have told him that this is expressly political. Zeke, what does it mean in terms of timing for this warrant to be executed now?
We've seen a lot, certainly in the last two presidential elections, that the Department of Justice tries to maintain its independence and try to make it by not taking any overt actions. Certainly in the run-up to a presidential election. Former President Donald Trump is not a declared candidate for 2024 right now. There have been reports that he was potentially using an announcement now. The timing of this could potentially be, to get ahead of that potential announcement, so then they are not taking this action. They're taking this action against a private citizen, not a repeat presidential aspirant, which could very well be the case, potentially any day now. given some of the reporting out there. So there's that factor to this. The other, my sources in the current White House, the Biden White House, say they were totally unaware that this was going on, and are referring all comments to the Department of Justice as this White House is trying to make sort of a very overt display of their hands-off nature of the Department of Justice in response to what they viewed as the last President Trump's, sort of attempts, more heavy-handed attempts to direct investigations there. So the politics is all through this, but in terms of the actual law, there is a federal judge who had to sign off on this warrant for the search, and those are facts that are going to come out. They had to show probable cause to get that. So the politics is a lot of the atmospherics here, but beneath that, so it's sometimes it's difficult to set it aside. But setting all of that aside, there are some real allegations here. It seems that federal law enforcement officials are investigating.
Zeke, and this, of course, is breaking news, so you may not know the answer to this, but as you raise this point, we have been waiting to see if the former president is going to announce another run for the White House. Does it make a difference if he is a declared presidential candidate versus a private citizen?
It probably does not, because the Department of Justice's internal guidance, they've referred back to the past couple of election cycles, sort of puts that special sensitivity surrounding these sorts of investigations to high-profile political figures. That generally kicks in, weeks or months before an election. It's not, we're months from the midterm elections, not the 2024 presidential race. But then there's also the most important decision maker in all of this, which is, former President Trump himself. Does this affect his timing in terms of what he will do? That's certainly something we'll all be looking at chase down in the next few weeks. He's currently getting support from the Republican National Committee for some of his legal bills around the January 6th investigations and other ones. If he were to become a declared candidate, that spigot would likely get turned off because of campaign finance rules. So that's been one of the things keeping him from declaring a repeat candidacy. So it'll be certainly one of the reporting lines of many as we sort of process the aftermath of this search warrant, the execution of that search warrant.
I want to head back over to Scott MacFarlane, who has been working his sources. Scott very rightfully pointed out from the very beginning, when we first heard about this from the former president, that we did not know what investigation it might be related to. We have now learned from Jeff Pegues and multiple sources confirming to CBS News that this is related to missing documents. Scott, what more have you learned?
Well, it's also worth remembering the National Archives, which is in charge of those documents, is supposed to have those documents, formally requested the Justice Department to investigate this and investigate the missing records, and they did so 6 months ago, in early February. So there is that connection, that connective tissue between the archives requesting an investigation and a search warrant being executed into those missing records. It's also worth underscoring this issue of the missing documents from Mar-a-Lago has also been the subject of a congressional investigation, not by the January 6th Select Committee, but by the U.S. House Oversight Committee. They've been looking into this as well. I note this because it just underscores the volume of investigations that have some nexus to Donald Trump. Not just law enforcement investigations, not just federal, not just local, not just state, but also congressional. So there are parallel investigations into these records. And now, 6 months after the archives requested it, we get this confirmation the Justice Department executed a search warrant about those missing boxes of records.
Scott, as you point out, this started in February. It has been ongoing, but it's also been augmented, questions about missing emails, in part because of the January 6th investigation and questions about the president's Secret Service detail and missing text messages and all of that. Might that have contributed, or is this really something that is in its own lane?
The Justice Department will say it investigates the facts wherever they may lead. It does so independently of any pressures from Congress or from the White House. Let's leave that baseline right there. But the January 6th Select Committee is a great example of how investigations begin in a certain spot and you don't know where they're going to go or how they're going to spread into territory that was unimagined when the investigation began. So if a search warrant is executed at Mar-a-Lago, there's no point certain as to where that investigation will end. It will go wherever the facts may lead. Investigations by federal law enforcement tend to sprawl. They tend to grow. The search warrant's going to be key, signed by a federal judge. I'll underscore this point I made earlier. Search warrants in the federal system are public documents filed with U.S. district courthouses across the country, signed by federal judges. They are, in fact, public records, but they're often sealed when they're executed on a business, on a property, on a person, on a phone, on a piece of property. So this search warrant appears to be sealed. Our initial searches, the federal courts in Florida, in New York, in New Jersey, and D.C. don't show it. That's not uncommon. But if a case is filed, civil, criminal, or otherwise, from anybody or against anybody related to Mar-a-Lago, those search warrants tend to come out through the process line.
I really appreciate that additional information. And as you say, Scott, when an investigation starts, it may go in multiple different directions. If you are just now joining us, we have learned that the former president, President Trump, has had a search warrant executed at his residence in Mar-a-Lago. We have learned that it is related to missing federal documents, and that the president was not there, or the former president was not there at the time, and that the current president was not given advance notice. I want to go back one more time to Jessica Levinson. Jessica, we heard Scott say that a search warrant may lead in multiple different directions. Might we expect that this is now going to take us to other residences of the former president?
Well, the answer, which I know is annoying, is that we don't know. And we've seen, for instance, throughout the January 6th investigation, that I think even the committee members have been surprised at times about where the evidence takes them. I have the suspicion in this case that maybe there was additional evidence that created this timeline, because there's been reporting, as you've discussed now for a while, that there were these 15 boxes, there were these documents that were improperly taken from the White House. There's been reporting that some of these documents were classified. Something happened to make this search warrant happen now. And I think that's one of the things that we want to try and find out. And could it lead to additional information? I think the answer is absolutely yes. It could either lead to evidence that the Department of Justice decides that it needs to look at other residences, at other offices. It could solidify their feeling that, in fact, there is not just probable cause, but they can show proof beyond a reasonable doubt that a federal crime occurred. So right now, all we know is that there was a search warrant, that a magistrate judge, a judge who tends to look at these issues very carefully, said, yes, I agree with you. There's probable cause that there was a specific federal crime that was committed. There's probable cause that the evidence of that specific federal crime is, in fact, at Mar-a-Lago. And again, the other thing we know is that these investigations, as Scott said, you don't always know which direction it takes. We're talking about, at this point, the removal of documents. We don't know, I think, exactly what was in all of those documents or why they were removed in the first place. All of that will be things that we're all watching very carefully. Of course, what could become public? What could become public is if there's actually an indictment that is filed against the former president or other members of his inner circle.
All right. A major breaking news story that we continue to follow. FBI officials have executed a warrant on the former president's home in Mar-a-Lago. We're going to take a quick break. We will continue following this story on the other side.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Police in Albuquerque, New Mexico say someone is targeting the city's Muslim community. 4 Muslim men have been murdered in the past 9 months, and investigators believe that the killings are connected. For more on this, I am joined by the mayor of Albuquerque, Tim Keller. Welcome, Mayor Keller. So there was one murder back in November, and then 2 weeks ago, the first of 3 more murders. Tell us, at what point was the decision made to get the FBI involved?
Well, it was really after the second one. And of course, what happened and no one foresaw, it is just tragedy on top of tragedy, is that, an individual who was at the funeral for the third individual, was then killed that night. And that